Welcome back to the channel, guys. You're watching Theory Hammer, and this is part 2 of the June data slate. We're going to actually be going over the designer's commentary, which is very long. It's like 20 pages or something like that. And we're also going to be going over the Pariah Nexus mission pack. If you haven't seen part 1, it's linked in the description, so watch that first, and then come back here and then watch this. It's been a while since I've read this, so there's going to be a lot of things on here where I'm just going to have to read through it, so this might also be like a relatively long video. Hopefully it's not super duper long, hopefully I can get through it kind of quick, but we will see. Now if you guys like what you see, thunderhammer the like button, subscribe to the channel, hit Nurgle's bell, leave a comment down below, tell us what you think about these updates, and check out our other videos. We got all kinds of stuff out there you're going to want to watch. As I've said in some of my previous videos, I'm going to be doing a giveaway. More to come in a video next week, but you know, be on the lookout for that. And I think that's everything. I'm just going to start with the core rules updates, version 1.3, right? Yeah. So I'm going to know a change when I see one, but some of these I might be like, was that like that before? So we're just going to go. Start with redeployments. Rules that allow players to redeploy certain units after both armies are deployed, like Huron Blackheart's Red Corsair ability, are always resolved after the deploy army's step, or if you are playing a Crusade battle after the deploy army stuff, which nobody plays Crusade, and before the determine first turn step. So if we ignore the thing in parentheses there, rules that allow players to redeploy certain units after both armies are deployed are always resolved after the deploy army's step and before the determine first turn step, before determining who has first turn. When a player uses such a rule, they remove that unit from the battlefield and redeploy using all the normal rules, so you can still use infiltrators, and then you alternate. Alright, unit coherency. If for any reason a model cannot be set up in unit coherency or cannot be set up following any restrictions stated by other rules, example while setting up using the Deep Strike ability, that unit cannot be set up. If it cannot end a move in unit coherency, it cannot make that move, and its models are returned to its previous positions. Okay, so the battle round, out of phase rules. Some rules allow models or units to move, shoot, charge, or fight outside the normal turn sequence. For example, Fire Overwatch stratagem enables the unit to shoot in your opponent's turn, so where your shooting phase. When using out of phase rules to perform an action as if it were one of your phases, you cannot use any other rules that would normally trigger that phase. And then there's an example. Your persisting effects, some rules apply an effect that lasts until a certain duration has passed, like to the start of your next turn. Some effects are known as persisting effects, as if a persisting effect applies to a unit when it is embarked within transport, and make a note of that effect and its duration. If that unit disembarks for any reason, any persisting effects continue to apply to that unit for the full duration. If the persisting effect applies to an attached unit, and that unit ceases to be an attached unit because either all of the bodyguard models are destroyed or all of the leaders are destroyed, any persisting effects continue to apply to the surviving units for their full duration. Okay, so gaining command points. Change outside of the 1 CP players gain at the start of the command phase. Each player could only gain a total of 1 CP per battle round, regardless of the source. This includes other CP gained at the start of the command phase. Okay, so that's the same, I'm pretty sure, all this stuff. Battle shock, in this step, if for any reason a unit is forced to take a battle shock test for being below its starting strength, unless otherwise stated, that unit does not also have to take a battle shock test for being below half strength. So if you have to take a battle shock test for being below starting for some other rule, like maybe like Chaos or something, like the Dread Talon guys, you only have to take one. Alright, page 2. Move units, third paragraph. Each time you move a unit, you can move any of its models you choose to. The controlling player chooses the order in which the models move the models. Each time you move a model, other than when a model remains stationary, you can move it across the battlefield in any combination of straight lines and pivots. See below. Ooh, spicy. While you are moving it, no part of the base can be moved through an enemy model or across the edge of the battlefield. No part of its base, what if you don't have a base, can be moved through an enemy model or across the edge of the battlefield. It can be moved through friendly models, but it cannot end its move on top of another model. The only exception to this is when moving monsters or vehicles. Such models cannot be moved through other friendly monsters and vehicles, and must be moved around them instead. While it is moving in a straight line, it can be moved through any space its base can fit through, but it cannot end its move somewhere the model cannot be placed. So basically what this means is the terrain piece here that you see in their example, this allows the dude to go through it because his wings are too big normally. This allows him to move through because of his base size. So that's a change for sure. Now we have straight lines. Moving units. Each time you move a model in a straight line, measure the distance from the same point on its base at the start and end of that line. For example, you can measure from the back of a model's base and measure the distance to the back of the model's base at the end of that line. If a model does not have a base, measure using the same point on that model at the start and the end of that line. So they have some examples here about pivoting stuff, but we have pivots now. Each time a model pivots, rotate it any amount around its central axis, perpendicular to the battlefield through the center of its base, or through the center of the model if it doesn't have a base. The first time you do this, during each model's move, subtract that model's pivot value, see below, from the remaining distance it can move during that move. If there is not enough distance to do this, it cannot pivot. Note that the distance it can move is only reduced once for that move, regardless of how many additional times it pivots during that move. So pivot value is here. This is huge. This is a huge change for vehicles, and just models in general with a base that isn't a circle. So models have a pivot value of 0 inches unless otherwise stated. Monsters and vehicles, excluding models on round bases and aircraft models, have a pivot value of 2 inches unless otherwise stated. Okay, so what this means is these things can now pivot on the spot, and it only costs them 2 inches. They can go around a corner, and then they can go around as many other corners as you want and pivot for free, as long as you don't go further than your movement characteristic at that point. So you pay 2 inches to get a pivot, and then every other pivot along your move is free at that point, which is huge. It makes vehicles so much easier to move. Like if this Rhino wanted to move up, I don't have an example I could do right here, but if the Rhino wants to move up, it can then just pivot on the spot and then move sideways instead of having to swing its base around and calculate, how far that point moved up to the right slightly because it pivoted, So this is much needed. It's still kind of clunky, but it's better than what we had before, so I'm not gonna be too much of a piece of shit about it. But yeah, pivoting is great now. We can actually move things, and things can actually get to places where you need them to. This can be a little weird though. You can pivot things and then get extra inches out of deep strike and stuff like that. Because you come down, you roll the dice, you then go to move your unit, and if it's not within range, it can't be moved. So you would swivel the base so that it is in range, and then it can be moved. Kind of shitty on smaller models, like with oval bases, because now if they try to pivot, it's going to cost them 2 inches to do so, which is kind of lame, but overall this is a good rule, and this is going to change some stuff for sure. It's going to change how fast vehicles are, and it's going to make games a little bit easier, and so I like something like that. It's nice. All right, so we're going to move on to the next page, because this is a huge change to the game, because I'm going to summarize all these changes at the end, in addition to some of the other stuff that we saw with the points and stuff, and the balanced data slate. There's just, the game has changed. The game is completely different, and that's why we're in 11th edition. So, moving on. I guess, should we go over these? So the center of a model, this is what it says. It's got like the point there in the center with the X through it, because you've drawn, a big square around your model. Pivoting around the central axis, you just, turn it in place there. Moving a pivot value of 0, so you move in lines, like straight lines, which is probably the easiest way to do it anyway. That's how you should move. And then moving without a pivot point, so you just move up 6 inches and then you slide 6 inches. So that's how I would tend to move. I would kind of just stay in my orientation and then just kind of slide around if I could, unless I had to pivot around something, which you do find you need to do pretty often. Moving with a pivot value of 2. So this thing moves up 6 inches, it then pivots 4, okay, no. So it moved up, I guess, hang on. The same vehicle has moved 6 inches in a straight line, then 4 inches in another straight line, pivoting around its central axis. At the end of its move, the pivot subtracts 2 inches from the movement. Yeah, okay. So it ends up here because it had to pivot slightly, but now it can just spin around in place. So moving with multiple pivots. The same vehicle pivots more than once during its move, but the total distance it can move is still only reduced by its pivot value of 2. It moves 5 inches in a straight line, pivots itself around its central axis, and then 5 inches in another straight line, pivoting around its central axis again. So it comes up, pivots, comes down 5, pivots again to be straight. So that's pretty awesome. Moving overhanging models with a pivot value of 2. So this thing moves 6 inches, normally, in this picture. So it moved 6 inches up. It's going to pivot now, and then it's going to move 4 inches down. I guess it probably didn't need to move that far. This is kind of a funny example. If they had it turned a different way. Anyway, so pivots, moves 4 inches this way because it can move 12 normally, so it can only move 10, but it still gets to where it needs to go. So it's back here, now it's over here. So much easier. So much easier. Firing deck. Some transports have a firing deck. You can select X models embarked within it who have not already shot this phase. Then for each of those embarked models, you can select one ranged weapon the embarked model is equipped with, excluding one-shot weapons, which that is the same. So I'm not sure if this was the same before, whose weapons have not already shot. I think that was an addition at some point recently. And then until the end of the phase, those models' units are not eligible to shoot. The selected models' units are not eligible to shoot, so interesting thing there. So firing deck X, I'm pretty sure this is just a summary. Shooting phase. Unless at least one model in a unit is an eligible target for at least one or more of its ranged weapons, that model's unit cannot be selected to shoot, right? This doesn't change the unit's eligibility to shoot, but it does mean that unit can't be selected to shoot at nothing, and therefore won't qualify for other rules that trigger, for example, Gargoyle, Winged, Swarm ability, and Dark Packs. Mortal wounds. Some rules inflict mortal wounds on a unit. Each time mortal wounds are inflicted on a unit, each of those mortal wounds inflicts 1 point of damage to a unit, and they are always applied one at a time. Each mortal wound is allocated to a model in the same manner as allocating an attack. Excess damage from mortal wounds is not lost if the damage can be allocated to another model. Instead, keep allocating damage to another model in the target unit until either all of the damage has been allocated or the target unit is destroyed. Okay. If an attack inflicts mortal wounds in addition to any normal damage, do not make a wound roll or saving throw, including invulnerable saves, against those mortal wounds. If those mortal wounds are inflicted by an attack that has the precision ability, the attacking model's controlling player can allocate those mortal wounds to a character model in that unit. That was something I was actually wondering about with the Palatine. If mortal wounds are being inflicted as a result of the hazardous ability, or by an attack with the devastating wounds ability that scored a critical wound, each time those mortal wounds are allocated to a model, if that model is destroyed as a result of those mortal wounds, the remaining mortal wounds from the attack are lost, just like a normal attack. Okay, that was a lot to get through, a whole lot to get through. But basically, mortal wounds with devastating wounds, they now just go through and it's the same thing, it just gives protection to a lot of models. That's what this rewrite is for. There's a ton of things in the game that say, we get, in Feel No Pain gets mortal wounds. This now is mortal wounds, but it effectively is the same as a dev wound. A dev wound before it changed. How am I put? You guys get what I'm saying? Dev wounds no longer did mortal wounds. They just ignored your save and invulns and then just did the damage. That way damage wouldn't carry over. This turns it into a mortal wound now, so you get abilities against them. You guys get it. If when a unit is selected to shoot or fight, at least one or more of its attacks can inflict mortal wounds on a target, resolve any normal damage inflicted by the attacking unit's attacks on that target before inflicting any mortal wounds on the target. If an attack inflicts mortal wounds in addition to any normal damage, but the normal damage is subsequently saved, the target still suffers those mortal wounds, as described above. We are on to indirect fire. Oh god, there's 33 pocket, oh no. Alright, so weapons with indirect fire, this is the change. If no models in the target unit are visible to the attacking unit's attacks, subtract 1 from that attack's hit roll. An unmodified hit roll of 1, 2, or 3 always fails, and the target has the benefit of cover. Okay, so even if you were +1 to hit, so if you're -1 to hit and then back to +1 to hit, now you're hitting on 3s, but an unmodified hit roll of 1 to 3 always fails anyway, so you always hit on 4s or worse with indirect fire now. So hazardous got a lot of changes, unless these are the same as before. After that unit has resolved all of its attacks, for each hazardous weapon that targets were selected for, when resolving those attacks, that unit must take 1 hazardous test. To do so, roll a d6, and when it failed, for each failed test, you must resolve the following sequence. Resolve them one at a time. If possible, select one model in that unit that has lost 1 or more wounds and is equipped with 1 or more hazardous weapons. Otherwise, if possible, select 1 model in that unit, excluding characters, equipped with 1 or more hazardous weapons. Otherwise, select 1 character model in that unit, equipped with 1 or more hazardous weapons. If a model is selected, it suffers 3 mortal wounds, and when allocating those mortal wounds, they must be allocated to the selected model. Okay, that's a change. So, hazardous no longer auto-kills you. That is nice. Because some models with hazardous have more than 3 wounds, I'm pretty sure, and they just still auto-die because they're not characters or vehicles. There's only a few of them, but they exist. If a unit from a player's army is selected as the target of a fire overwatch stratagem in their opponent's charge phase, any mortal wounds inflicted by hazardous tests are allocated after the charging unit has ended its charge move. Okay, so I'm not sure if that was a recent ad or an old ad, but that's nice to know. You charge me, I shoot you with a bunch of hazardous weapons, you then make your charge move, and then I take my hazardous rolls. Alright, so extra attacks, weapons with extra attacks. Each time the bearer of one or more extra attacks fights, it makes attacks with each of its extra attacks melee weapon it is equipped with, and it makes attacks with one of the melee weapons it is equipped with that does not have the extra attacks ability, if any. The number of attacks made with its extra attacks weapon cannot be modified by other rules, unless that weapon's name is explicitly stated. Okay, so dev wounds, these changed. They inflict mortal wounds again. So no saving throws of any kind can be made against the attack. If you roll a critical wound, including invulns, such attacks are only allocated to a model after all other attacks made by the attacking unit have been allocated and resolved. After that attack is allocated and after any modifiers are applied, it inflicts a number of mortal wounds on the target equal to its damage characteristic of the attack instead of inflicting damage normally. So it inflicts mortal wounds, but in the mortal wound section, it says devastating wounds. They don't carry over if they're dev wounds. Profiles. After all modifiers are applied, this cannot be less than 1 inch, the move characteristic. Okay. Unless it's a dash, in which case it can't move at all. Toughness. After all modifiers are applied, it cannot be less than 1. Save, same thing. It cannot be +1 or better. Okay. After all modifiers are applied. So wounds, once it's 0, it's dead. After all modifiers are applied for leadership, it cannot be 4+ or better, or 9 or worse. Okay. Interesting. It caps at 9 and 4. That's definitely a change, I think. Objective control. After all modifiers are applied, this cannot be less than 0. What would it like? How would that even work? For ranged weapons, after all modifiers are applied, it cannot be less than 1 inch. Interesting. After all modifiers are applied, this cannot be less than 1. For attacks, weapon skill, it cannot be better, +1 or -1, right? It doesn't say -1. After all modifiers are applied, this cannot be +1 or better. After all modifiers are applied for ballistic skill, it cannot be +1 or better. That's change, right? Like that's cannot be less than 1 for attacks. After all modifiers are applied, this cannot be +1 or better. What about -1 or worse? After all modifiers are applied, this cannot be +1 or better. Okay, strength cannot be less than 1. Armor penetration cannot be worse than 0. Damage, after all modifiers are applied, this cannot be less than 1. The exception is where a rule specifies that you can change it to 0. Deep strike, if a unit with a deep strike ability arrives from strategic reserves, a controlling player may choose for that unit to set up using either the strategic reserve or using the deep strike ability, so they can do either. Leaders, each time last model in a character unit that is attached to a bodyguard unit is destroyed, and there is not another character unit attached, that attached unit bodyguard unit becomes a separate unit with its original starting strength. If this happens as a result of an attack, they become separate units after the attacking unit has resolved all of its attacks. Okay? Yep, so this matters because for like secondaries and stuff, if you kill, you have Purge the Foe or whatever, you're going to kill more units than them. You're killing a character and their unit, that's 2. Or for things that are on objectives, that matters as well. If you kill a unit with a character on objective, that's worth 2. Each time a unit that is a part of an attached unit is destroyed, it does not have the keywords of any other unit to make make up that attached unit unless it has those keywords on its own datasheet for the purposes of any rules that would be triggered when that unit is destroyed. Okay, so like a fights on death for specifically knobs or something like that. It wouldn't affect the war boss. I guess that's how I'm reading that. Or I guess that's a bad example. I don't know. I guess it's got an example here. If you only destroyed the bodyguard unit that is part of an attached unit, and you have not destroyed a character unit, if you only destroy the character unit that is part of an attached unit, or if you only destroy the whole attached unit, you have destroyed 1 character unit. This game sucks. Okay. If you destroy the bodyguard unit that is a part of an attached unit, you have not destroyed a character unit. Okay, so here's also some more examples. If you only destroyed the bodyguard unit, and it's part of an attached unit, you have not destroyed a character unit. If you only destroy a character unit that is part of an attached unit, or if you destroy the whole attached unit, you have destroyed 1 character unit. That's a change then. So did I misread this? Why is this fucking me up so much? If you only destroy the bodyguard unit. So I have a bunch of shit right here, and I have a character attached. If I only destroy the bodyguard unit that is part of an attached unit, you've not destroyed the character. If you only destroy the character that is part of an attached unit, or if you destroy the whole attached unit, you have destroyed 1 character unit. Someone explain this to me. Commander roll on any phase just after making an advanced, charge, desperate escape test or hazardous test for a unit from your army, or a hit, wound, damage roll saving throw for a model in a unit, or to determine the number of attacks made by a model in a unit. If you are using fast dice, the stratagem can still be used after rolling multiple rolls or saving throws at once. What? Wait a minute, that's a change. After you make one of these rolls, If you are using fast dice rolling, this stratagem can still be used after rolling multiple rolls or saving throws at once. Okay. You target a unit from your army, you re-roll that roll, test, or saving throw. If you're using fast dice, select one of the dice in the roll and re-roll it. Interesting. I think it makes it so you don't have to slow roll it sometimes. Insane Bravery stratagem. So this is before any battle shock test, you target a unit from your army, automatically passes, you cannot use it more than once. Watch this like not even have been changed. This command reroll, it's like the same thing, I just haven't read it for such a long time. Grenade, this definitely changed, so it excludes units that advance, fell back, or have shot. You select one grenade model in your unit and one enemy unit that is not within engagement range of one or more enemy units from your army and visible to that grenade model. Tank Shock, just after a vehicle unit from your army ends a charge move, you target that vehicle unit, select one enemy unit within engagement range of your unit, and select one vehicle model in your unit that is within engagement range of that enemy unit. Roll a number of d6 equal to the value, so it's the toughness now instead of the strength, and for each 5+, you suffer one mortal wound. You don't get any extra anymore. You just use the toughness. It's just higher than normal typically, and that kind of makes more sense because you're smacking into them with your bulky bulkers. Rapid Ingress. All right, so your unit can arrive on the battlefield as if it were the reinforcement step of your movement phase. And if every model in your unit has the Deep Strike ability, you can set that unit up as described in Deep Strike ability. Okay, yeah, that's the same. I think that was always like that. That changed a while ago. Fire Overwatch has to be visible. Cannot target Titanics. Yep. Heroic Intervention. This is 1 CP now. None of this other stuff changed CP cost, did it? Same Bravery, and okay. So, Movement Ruins. Infantry, Imperium, Primarchs, and Belisarius Call and Beast models can move through this terrain. Imperium, Primarch, and Belisarius Call and Beast models and fly models can be set up on any floor. Okay. So they literally just added them to the... Why not just make them infantry, bro? Just make them infantry. That's really the answer there. That's so fucking clunky. So, Ruins. Aircraft models are the exception to the visibility rules. Models that are within this terrain feature can be seen normally, and towering models that are within this terrain feature can also see out of it normally. Okay, so they don't have to be wholly within still, yeah. Okay, so select units. Your army must include at least one character model that is ineligible to be your warlord. Some rules grant the battle line keyword to additional units from your army. Typically, if you select a particular detachment or if your warlord is a specific model, when mustering your army, treat such units as battle line units for the purposes of this step, even though the selected warlord step comes afterward. Okay. So, objective markers. A player will control an objective marker at the end of any phase or turn if the level of control is greater than their opponent's. Okay. Makes sense. And then we have the FAQ. Damn, we're already 30 minutes in here. If a model has a rule that allows it to shoot or fight after a certain condition is met, such as being targeted by an attack, how many times can it shoot or fight as a result? As many times as the relevant condition is met unless otherwise stated. Okay. When a rule allows a model to shoot or fight after being destroyed, but before being removed from play, does that model's unit count as having been selected to shoot or fight? No. As such, any rules that trigger do not apply. When an attack targets a leader unit that contains one or more models that have the character keyword, and one or more models that do not have the character keyword, if that leader unit is not an attached unit, how can that attack be allocated to a character model in that unit? What? When an attack targets a leader unit that contains one or more models that have the character keyword and one or more models that do not have the character keyword, if that leader unit is not an attached unit, can the attack be allocated to the character model in the unit? What the fuck is the difference between an attached unit and a leader unit? Because like a leader is when you put a guy in the squad, right? I'm so confused. I have to read this again. When an attack targets a leader unit that contains one or more models that have the character keyword and one or more models that do not have the character keyword, if that leader unit is not an attached unit, can that attack be allocated to the character in the unit? How would it not be an attached unit? I don't get it. I don't fucking get it. I'm moving on. Where on a model do I measure from? When determining if something is within range of an aura ability, you measure from its base or the closest point of any part of the model if it does not have a base, as described in the measuring distances on page 7 of the core rules. After all modifiers, can save characteristics ever be better than +1 or better? The answer is no. So you can't ever have better than a 1+ save. You can't have a 0-up save. So if you had +1 to your save and you went into cover, you wouldn't be able to do both those things. You'd only get +1. If there are some rules that take effect with the same timing as when primary and secondary missions are checking for scoring victory points, are such rules resolved before or after the primary and secondary missions are checked for scoring victory points? Before. All rules must take effect before any primary or secondary points are checked for scoring. Timing and sequencing. If there are any other rules that take effect as the same timing as when oh, we already did that one. If some rules take effect at the start of a phase, turn, or battle round, and another rule takes effect during that same phase, turn, or battle round without specifying the start, can the latter rule take effect before all of those other rules are resolved? No, all rules that take effect at the start of a phase, turn, or battle round must be fully resolved before any rules that do not specify they take effect at the start of the phase, turn, or battle round. So if you have something that just says during the movement phase you can do this, and I have something that says at the start of the movement phase, you can't be like, well, I'm just going to do it before this, before your start of the movement phase ability, because I can do it like any time during the movement phase. Nope, doesn't work that way according to that. Each time a unit becomes battle shocked, do the effects of any previously used stratagems that are still affecting that unit stop applying? No. Okay. Alright, so here's the next one here. As all objective markers begin the battle in a contested state, is it ever possible for a player to control that objective marker before the end of the first player's command phase? No. Okay. I'm pretty sure that's unchanged, right? Because stuff would happen at the end of the command phase, not the beginning. Because you control objectives at the end of a phase, so you'd have to control at the end of the command phase, not the beginning. So no on that one. If a unit from your army has a rule that allows it to be the target of a stratagem, even if that stratagem has already been used earlier that phase, what happens if you have not used a stratagem yet that phase? Can you use that stratagem again later in that phase as a result? No, unless that later used stratagem is also the target of a unit with such an ability. Okay. If a rule would apply when a model or unit is destroyed, but another rule is also preventing that model or unit from being destroyed, does the former rule take effect? No, unless that model is only temporarily prevented from being removed from play, at which point such a rule would take effect. If a model is subject to two rules that set a characteristic to a particular value, example, Norn Emissary's singular purpose ability and being battle shocked, which rule is resolved first? The order is determined by the active player, or if it is at the start or the end of the battle round, players roll off to determine who chooses. In the example, in the controlling player's turn, they would choose for the battle shocked unit to take effect, setting the objective control characteristic to 0, and then the singular purpose ability to take effect, setting the final objective control characteristic to 15. In the opponent's turn, however, their opponent could choose to apply the rule in the opposite order, resulting in, objective control 0. Okay. If both players have a rule that they can optionally decide to activate or not, example, orc player calling a wog, and those decisions are made at the same time, in what order must those players decide whether they use such rules? If it is during a player's turn, that player decides first, then their opponent does. If it is not during a player's turn, the players roll off, and the loser of the roll must decide first, followed by the opponent. Each time a unit from a player's army shoots or fights, if an enemy unit is destroyed by attacks, while there are still unresolved attacks left to make against it, do those remaining attacks need to be resolved? No. Although if any of those attacks are made with weapons with one shot, those weapons still have been shot. Similarly, hazardous tests will need to be taken for any weapons with the hazardous ability making those unresolved attacks. If a rule adds to the damage characteristic of an attack, like Melta, and another rule changes the damage characteristic to 0, example, Thousand Suns, will the final damage be 0? No. The rules that change the damage characteristic to 0 take effect first, and then other modifiers are applied. So this is the same thing with halving damage. In the example, if the weapon had Melta 2, the damage characteristic would be changed to 0 first, then the Melta 2 would add 2 to the damage for a final of 2. That we knew already. Out of phase rules. Can a monster or vehicle unit that is within engagement range of one or more enemy units be targeted with the Fire Overwatch stratagem because of the Big Guns Never Tire? No. Big Guns Never Tire allows the unit to shoot in its controlling player's shooting phase, but such rules do not take effect in other phases. Yep. Can rules that specify they only take effect in the controlling player's shooting phase be used when shooting with the Fire Overwatch stratagem, example, firing deck? Nope. Example, right, out of phase rules. Positioning and movement. Can models overhang the edge of the battlefield? Yes, as long as the model's base or hull, I kind of want to know what the hull is now, is wholly on the battlefield. When a model overhangs the edge of the battlefield, how does that affect its visibility? That model's player can draw a line of sight from any part of the model that is not overhanging the edge of the battlefield. Their opponent can draw a line of sight to any part of the model. In the deployment step, if a model has to be set up in your deployment zone, can parts of that model overhang your deployment zone? No. Okay, unless that model is too large to do otherwise, in which case, as much of that model as possible must be set up within your deployment zone. If a model is within range of multiple objective markers when determining its control level, does it count toward each of them? It does. When determining if a unit is partially within, but not wholly within a terrain feature, is visible to another unit, is it true line of sight used as normal? Yes, of course. When making a normal move, is it ever possible for a model to move a distance in inches greater than its move characteristic? No. Can a unit with a minimum move characteristic be affected by a rule that would cause it to move less than a minimum move characteristic? No. When a rule instructs a player that they must set up a unit on the battlefield, example, disembarking from a transport, so on and so forth, if there is not enough space to set up every model in that unit while adhering to any limitations on where those models can be set up, what happens to the unit and the models that cannot be set up? The unit can still be set up, but any models that cannot be are destroyed. Yeah. Those models are considered to have been destroyed by the opponent's army, but not by any specific models or units. If a unit falls back, so that matters because like if certain units like gain stuff by killing enemy units, they don't gain it from this. Like nothing gains it, just your army killed it. If a unit falls back, one or more of those models from the unit are destroyed, and then one or more of the models are returned to the battlefield. Does the unit and or those returned models still count as having fallen back that turn? Yes, the same is true for any other type of move. Okay. If a unit falls back then becomes a repositioned unit, does it still count as having fallen back? Yes. Can models be returned to a unit that is on the battlefield but was not on the battlefield at the start of the phase? Transports. Can a unit embarked within a transport make use of any rule it has that can affect the transport? For example, if a lieutenant is embarked with a rhino that has target priority, let that rhino shoot and declare a charge in a turn which it fell back now. Okay. A unit that arrives from reserve counts as having made a normal move. Can it embark within a transport as a result? No. What? If a rule allows a unit to make a normal advance or fallback move from outside of its controlling player's movement phase just after making a normal move, can that unit embark within a friendly transport? Yes. It's so good. So good. When a transport is equipped with additional ranged weapons due to the firing deck, do those weapons benefit from any extra abilities or rules that might be conferred to them by the embarked models? Only if those embarked models' rules explicitly state that they still apply while embarked in the transport. Can a transport use the firing deck to shoot a weapon equipped by a model that fell back this turn? Can a transport use the firing deck ability to shoot with a weapon equipped by a model that advanced this turn if that weapon does not have the assault ability? Yes, in both cases. Yeah, baby. Rhinos are awesome. Play them. They're 75 points. When a unit is set up on the battlefield from reserves, it is unable to make moves for the rest of the phase. Can such a unit make use of an ability in another phase to let it move? Example, Lieutenant in Phobos armor. Yes. If a unit is strategic reserve and some of the models in that unit have the deep strike ability, but not all the models have the deep strike ability, can it be set up on the battlefield using deep strike when arriving from reserve? No. If a unit from your army has a rule that allows it to be set up on the battlefield from reserves in the first battle round, can that unit be set up in the reinforcement step of your opponent's movement phase using the rapid ingress? Yes. Unless that rule explicitly states that it applies in your movement phase, in which case it is prevented by the restriction of your out-of-phase rule. When setting up a unit from strategic reserve, does the entire unit have to be set up within the necessary distance of one or more of the battlefield edges? When setting up that unit, it must be set up wholly within the distance specified from the battlefield edge. This can mean that the unit can be set up wholly within the distance specified from one or more battlefield edges, but you can only measure the distance from one of those battlefield edges. If a model is too large to be able to set up within the restrictions described by strategic reserves, can it still be placed in two strategic reserves and then set up on the battlefield later? Yes, but it must be set up so that it is touching your battlefield edge, while still being more than 9 inches away from all enemy units and adhering to any other placement limitations. During a turn in which such a large model, excluding aircraft, is set up on the battlefield, that model's unit cannot make any sort of, it can't do anything, can't make a normal move, advance, fallback, can't remain stationary, and make any attacks with ranged weapons or declare a charge. It excludes aircraft now. During a turn in which such a large model is set up on the battlefield, oh baby, excluding aircraft, the tiger shark. I'm running a fucking tiger shark. I'm running a tiger shark. I'm running a tiger shark. Oh baby, I'm running a tiger shark. Do aircraft models that have been set up in reserve count towards the limits of how much a player's army can be placed in two strategic reserves? No. In the declare battles formation step, aircraft models only count as being in reserves, not strategic reserves. They only start to be treated as being strategic reserves after the battle has started. Yeah, this is kind of weird, this whole thing, how it's like a different type of reserve. It like specifically says it. If a unit that started the battle on the battlefield is later placed into strategic reserve, in what battle round can it be set up on the battlefield? If the mission pack allows it, example chapter approved Pariah Nexus, then in any battle round, provided that unit has the rule that describes how it will arrive from strategic reserve, otherwise from the second battle round onward. So if the mission pack allows it, then any battle round, otherwise from the second battle round onward. Can a unit in reserve be the target of a stratagem? Yes, if all of the requirements in the target section of that stratagem are met. Command phase. If a rule takes effect once per battle, explicitly gives a player more than 1 CP in a battle round. Example, Imperial Knights Code Chivalric Army rule. Does that rule ignore the limitations on how many CP a player gained at this battle round? Yes. Is it possible for a unit to take a battle shock test in both the command step of the command phase and in the battle shock step of the command phase? Yes. If a rule takes effect in your command phase and doesn't explicitly state that it happens in the battle shock step or at the end of your command phase, example, Tyrannid, Shadow, and the Warp, does it always take place in the command step? Yes. Can a unit be made to take more than 1 battle shock test in the battle shock step of the command phase? No. But a unit can be made to take more than 1 battle shock test in all other phases as well as the command step of the command phase. After a unit fights, is it required to consolidate even if its controlling player does not want to? Yes. Consolidation for the unit is not optional. However, during that consolidation, for each model in the unit, whether or not that model makes a consolidation move is optional. Okay, so that's unchanged, I think. Actions and missions. If an action states in its unit section that 1 unit can perform it, is it possible for multiple units to each perform 1 instance of that action? No, only 1 unit from your army can perform that action at a time. For primary and secondary missions that award victory points for destroying character models or units, if those models or units are returned to the battlefield and then subsequently destroyed again, will such primary and secondary missions award victory points for them being destroyed again? Yes, unless the primary or secondary mission specifies otherwise. Mustering armies. In the mustering armies rule, it says that no unit can have more than 1 enhancement. If a unit is able to have 2 character units attached to it in the declare battle formation step, can each of those characters have an enhancement? Yes. This restriction only applies to the muster's army step. Okay. Psychic abilities. Are all mortal wounds inflicted by a psychic ability, including any cause to a unit with that ability inflicted by a psychic attack? Yes. Do Doombolt and similar abilities count as psychic attacks for the purposes of Feel No Pain against psychic attacks? Yes. Not sure if that was recent or not, but that's what we get. Oh my god, we have so many more pages. When hazardous weapons inflict 1 or more mortal wounds as a result of a failed hazardous test, if that weapon is also a psychic weapon, are those mortal wounds inflicted by a psychic attack? Yes. Okay. As close as possible. If a rule instructs you to move a model as close as possible to unit, model, or objective marker, you must end that model's move in base-to-base contact with that unit, model, or objective marker. If its move is sufficient to do so without breaking any other restrictions, such as unit coherency, or as close as you can achieve if it's not sufficient. If a model is already as close as possible to a unit, models, or objective markers, when it is instructed to make a move as close as possible toward that unit, model, or objective marker, that model cannot be moved, but still counts as having made a move in question. Okay. The exception to this is that a model with a pivot value of 0 and a round base that is as close as possible to an enemy model or objective marker can pivot when its unit piles in or consolidates. Base-to-base contact. When moving a model from your army into base-to-base contact with an enemy model during a pile-in or consolidation move, if that enemy model overhangs its base such that it is not possible to move your model into base-to-base contact with that model until the end of the turn, those models are considered to be in base-to-base contact with each other and within engage range of each other, while the following rules are true. So the following things are true. The distance your model could move was sufficient to move it into base-to-base contact. You have moved your model as close as possible. Any part of one model is within 1 inch of any part of the other model. Okay, so at least some part of you can get within 1 inch. Battle line. Yeah, so that's not changed. This is not changed. Big guns never tire out of phase shooting. The big guns never tire special rule specifies that it takes effect in the controlling player's shooting phase. For units affected by this rule, if they are locked in combat, they cannot make use of any rules that let them shoot in any other phases, example, Fire Overwatch. Charging with a unit, when moving models from your army within engaged range of an enemy unit, if that enemy model overhangs its base such that it is not possible to move your model within engaged range of that enemy model till the end of the turn, both those models are considered to be engaged range. If the distance your model could move was sufficient to move within engaged range of that model, if there was no overhang, you have moved your model as close as possible to the enemy model, and any part of one model is within 1 inch of any part of the other model. Rerolls. When a roll allows you to reroll one roll or saving throw out of multiple rolls or saving throws for a unit, if you're using fast dice rolling, you can roll multiple rolls or saving throws at once and then decide which of those to reroll. That's an awesome change. Fights on death. So when doing so, those models may pile in, following the normal restrictions for unit coherency and such, then make the melee attacks, selecting which weapons they will make the attacks with and the targets for those attacks before resolving the attacks. Okay? Gaining a CP from mission cards. When playing a mission that gives a player 1 or more CP for discarding a secondary mission card, That CP counts towards the limit of the number of CP that player gains in the battle round. Hull, here we go. When measuring to or from a vehicle, excluding walker models that have a base and models that do not have a base, measure to and from the hull, which means any part of the model, or its base if it has one, that is closest to the point of being measured. What? That is closest to the point being measured from or to. What? When measuring to or from vehicles and models that do not have a base, measure to and from the hull, which means any part of the model that is closest to the point being measured from or to. Note that this may not correspond literally with the area on the vehicle usually themed hull. See vehicle and bases. Motherfuckers. Immediately, see just after. Great stuff. Measuring to destroyed models. When a player has to measure the distance to a destroyed model, that player can measure to any point occupied by the model's base or any part of the model if it doesn't have a base, or if it's a vehicle excluding walkers that have a base before it was destroyed. Measuring to a destroyed unit. When a player has to measure to the destroyed unit, they measure to the last model in the destroyed unit. Makes sense. Models without bases, see hull. No! Stop this! Mortal wounds. Saving throws of any kind cannot be made against damage inflicted by mortal wounds, although rules that allow models to ignore wounds, such as Feel No Pain, can be used if an attack inflicts a mixture of mortal wounds and normal damage. Resolve all of the attack into normal damage first. Yep. Okay, one shot. Each time a destroyed model is returned to a unit, any one-shot weapons equipped by that model that were shot before they were destroyed have still been shot. Each time a new unit is added to your army, any one-shot weapons those models are equipped with have not been shot. So you bring back a demolition charge guy. One-shot demolition charge guy. You already threw it. He can't throw it again. If the whole unit gets destroyed and you bring back the whole unit, then he does have it again. Flying. Need to make a video about how stupid it is. Okay, this is unchanged. Repositions units. Units that use such rules are known as repositioned units, and the points below always apply to them in addition to any other rules that can affect that unit, such as where they can or cannot be set up. Note that units that are using rules to embark within or disembark from transports are not repositioned units. Okay, so a repositioned unit that advanced or fell back in the phase in which it is set up has still advanced or fallen back in that phase. Otherwise, repositioned units count as having made a normal move. Okay, when it's being set up on the battlefield, if there are any areas of the battlefield that model cannot be set up within, example, there is a mission rule stating that when a player's reserve or strategic reserve units are set up on the battlefield, they cannot be set up within range of an objective marker that is either in no man's land or in their opponent's deployment zone, or there are one or more enemy units on the battlefield that have a rule such as enemy units that are set up on the battlefield as reinforcements cannot be set up within 12 inches of this unit. Okay. The models in that repositioned unit cannot be set up within those areas. Okay, we got there. Jesus fucking Christ. Rerolls. A reroll is still considered to be a roll, and as such, any rules that can be triggered by a dice roll can also be triggered by a reroll. Okay. There's more. Round bases. Some rules refer to round bases. A round base is one whose footprint is circular, as opposed to an oval base, whose footprint is an oval. Rules with multiple conditions and effects. Some rules have multiple conditions, with the second, more specific condition conferring an improved rule, either instead of the first condition rule or as well as it. So Locust Destroyer's hardwired destruction ability, or the Orc's biggest shells for bigger get stratagems. Such rules require both the first condition and the second condition to be satisfied for the improved rule ability. So hardwired for destruction ability reads, each time a model unit makes a ranged attack that targets a close eligible unit, reroll hit roll of 1. If the target of that attack is within range of an objective marker, your opponent controls, reroll hit roll instead. To be able to reroll the hit roll, the target must both be within range of an objective marker your opponent controls and be the closest eligible target. Got it. Alright. Shot. If a unit was selected to shoot and none of the models in its unit made any attacks, it is not considered to have shot. Right. This is unchanged stuff, I think. Table quarter. When measuring the distance to table quarter, only measure the horizontal distance. Okay? We're getting to the end here, thank God, because this is longer than I expected it to be. Vehicles and bases. So, blah-de-blah, when a vehicle with a base, excluding aircraft and walkers, ends a move within engagement range of one or more enemy models, it is considered to be in base-to-base contact with those models while it is within 0 inches horizontally and 5 inches vertically of those models. Okay, thank God, we're at the bottom. No, there's more. So after all modifiers are applied, strength, toughness, attacks, damage, and stuff can never be below 0. After all modifiers are applied, leadership can't be 4 up or 9, or can't be a 4 better or 9 or worse. After all modifiers are applied, armor penetration and objective control can't be worse than 0. After all modifiers are applied, move characteristic, range characteristic for ranged weapons can never be less than 1. Characteristics of 20 plus inches and star and NA can never be modified. Okay? Modifying characteristics by improving or reducing them. When improving weapon skill, ballistic skill, leadership, save characters, subtract the appropriate amount from the number before adding the plus sign. Example, improving a weapon skill of 3 plus by 1 will result in a weapon skill of 2 plus. After all modifiers are applied. Weapon skill, ballistic skill, save characteristic can never be plus 1 or better. Worsening weapon skill, ballistic skill, leadership, all this. Add the appropriate amount to the number before the plus sign. So that is the bottom of the designer's commentary. Oh my god, so much, and a lot of that was probably not changed, but a lot of it definitely was. Alright, and the last thing that we have here is going to be our Pariah Nexus Tournament Champion packet, version 1.0. So this is the same thing that we had with Leviathan, it's just a new version. Alright, so let's just get through it as fast as possible. So, I don't think any of this matters so much. Muster armies is described in the core rules. Instead of shuffling and drawing, so this is determined mission, instead of shuffling and drawing from the deployment mission rule and primary mission decks, players should use the pre-generated mission from the Pariah Nexus tournament mission pool. Set aside the secondary mission and secret mission decks as normal. Read the mission, that's the same. Place objectives. Players will now place objectives on the battlefield. Each deployment card's deployment zone map will show players how many objective markers to set up and where each should be placed. In Pariah Nexus tournament missions, models can end any type of move on top of an objective marker. Great. Create the battlefield. Players now create the battlefield and set up terrain features. Missions are played on rectangular battlefields whose dimensions are this, When setting up terrain features, use the guidelines in the terrain layout sections of this pack. Players must use the rules for terrain features detailed in the core rules, while the other approaches to this terrain layout may work within the collections of experienced organizers who recommend these terrain guidelines when in doubt. Determine attacker defender, select secondary missions, declare battle stuff. Okay, so all that's the same, I guess. Fixed missions, you got your fixed missions. Fixed missions are those marked by a symbol shown on the left. After revealing the 2 fixed missions you will use, set aside the remainder of your secondary mission deck. It will not be needed. Right. Tactical. After revealing that you'll be using tactical, shuffle your secondary mission deck. If you're using tactical, at the start of your first command phase, draw 2 cards from your secondary mission. The 2 secondary mission cards are active for you until you achieve them. At the start of your subsequent command phase, if you have fewer than 2 active secondary mission cards, draw from your secondary mission deck until you have 2 active secondary mission cards. At the end of your command phase, you can spend CP to use the new order stratagem below. It's just at the end of your command phase. One of your active mission cards is the target, and you discard it and draw a new one. At the end of either player's turn, if you scored any victory points as described in the secondary mission card, discard that secondary mission card it is achieved. At the end of your turn, if you can discard 1 or more of your active secondary mission cards. If you do, you gain a CP. If your secondary mission deck runs out, you cannot generate any additional secondaries during the battle. I don't know how that's possible, but reserve restrictions. No more than half of the units in your army can start the battle in reserve, and the points total of those units cannot be more than half of the total points of your army. Units embarked within a transport that is set up in reserve also count toward these limits. Reserve units cannot arrive on the battlefield during the first battle round, excluding units placed into strategic reserves during the battle. Any reserve units that have not arrived on the battlefield by the end of the 3rd battle round count as having been destroyed, as do any embarked units inside them. Okay. Deploy armies. Players take it in turns to set up their remaining units one at a time, starting with the defender. A player's model set up wholly within their deployment zone. If a player sets up a Titanic unit when it is their turn to set up a unit, they skip their next turn to set up a unit. If a player finishes deploying all of their units, the opponent then deploys the remainder of the units. Okay, I don't know why I'm reading through all these. I guess some of them did change, right? But these are all the same, it looks like, except for that. So let me just keep going. Some rules allow players to redeploy certain units after both armies are deployed, unless otherwise stated. Okay, that's the same. Roll off. The winner takes the first turn. Players alternate resolving any pre-battle rules from their army that they may have, starting with the player who took the first turn. Begin the battle. The first battle round begins. Players continue to resolve the battle round until it ends. Okay. Ending the battle. The battle ends after 5 battle rounds have been completed. Even if one player has no models in their army at the start of their turn, players continue to play out their turns until the battle ends. Determine the victor? Yeah. Alright, so primary mission and or secondary secret mission thing. So that's 50 points you can get from those. So primary and or secret. Secondaries is 40, and then army is battle ready is going to be 10 points. If using fixed missions, 20 victory points maximum per fixed mission card, okay? Victory points for destroying models or units. Some cards award victory points for destroying enemy models or units. If you gain victory points as described on such cards, you retain those victory points even if the destroyed models or units are subsequently returned to the battlefield. Yep. VP up to a limit. Some cards award victory points up to a stated limit, which may not be around multiple. Example, 2 points up to 5 points. In such cases, you can keep scoring up to the stated limit, and then any excess is lost, discarding cards. Some cards will begin with sections named when drawn, which details immediate next steps, including when such card can or must be discarded. Note if such a card is a secondary mission card, this section only applies if you're using tactical missions. Deployment cards stuff, that's all cool. Secret missions. At the end of the third battle round, starting with the player who has the second turn, if your primary mission victory points total is less than or equal to your opponent's, you can choose to undertake a secret mission. If you do, and this is at the end of the third battle round, so this is after you scored primary on turn 3. If you're still down a bunch, secretly select one card from your secret mission deck and place it to the side face down. You cannot score more than 20 victory points from the primary mission card. Any excess victory points are lost. At the end of the battle, reveal your secret mission card to your opponent. If you achieve the goal described on that card, you score the victory points described on that card. Actions. These are now a thing. Some cards feature actions that certain units can perform. Each action states which units can perform it, when it is stated, and when it is completed, and what the effects of it completing are. A unit cannot start to perform an action if one or more of the following apply to that unit. It's battle shocked, it's aircraft, it has objective control 0, so that's big. Within engagement range of one or more enemy units, has fallen back or advanced, is not eligible to shoot this phase. If a unit starts to perform an action until the end of the turn, that unit is not eligible to shoot or declare a charge unless it is a Titanic character, in which case, until the end of the turn, that unit cannot start to perform another action and is not eligible to declare a charge. Okay, if a unit performing an action makes a move, example, pile in and consolidation move, or leaves the battlefield, that action cannot be completed, excluding pile in and consolidate. Okay. The secondary mission card cannot be selected as a fixed mission and should not have the fixed mission symbol. Okay. So these are card erratas here. So that's an errata on that. When it comes to Cull the Horde, each time an enemy infantry unit is destroyed, if one or more of the following conditions are satisfied. Or each time an infantry unit is destroyed, if one or more of the conditions are satisfied. The starting strength of was 20 plus. The total of the wounds characteristic of models in the unit was 25 plus at its starting strength. When that unit's players added that unit to their army, the points value they subtracted from their total permitted for this battle was sufficient for that unit to be composed of 20 or more models. Jack, why did you say it out loud? Okay. Yeah, so that's interesting. So basically, if you wanted to be clever, because this said your starting strength was 20 plus, and you're like, well, I have 20 boys, or 20 guardsmen, or 20 of this, or 20 of that. I'm just going to take 19 now. This was like, no, you're fucking not. So now, you just always take the 20. So assassination, so that's big for orcs as well. Assassination. So one or more enemy character models were destroyed this turn, or all character models from your opponent's army have been destroyed. You get 5 points. Hidden supplies. When drawn, if you also drew the ritual primary mission, discard this mission and draw a new one. In the place objective marker step, players must set up one additional objective marker in no man's land. Before setting up this new objective marker, players must move it just 6 inches directly towards one of the corners of the battlefield. If no man's land touches any of the corners of the battlefield, you must move the objective marker towards one of those corners. Otherwise, players roll off and the winner selects which corner the objective marker is moved towards. Players then set up a new objective marker 6 inches from the center of the battlefield towards the diagonally opposite corner. Yeah, so you basically just roll off now. Scorched Earth, so the change here is that each time a player burns an objective marker, that player scores 5 victory points if that objective marker was in no man's land, and 10 victory points instead if that objective marker was in their opponent's deployment zone. Okay? So there's a bunch of FAQ stuff here. Oh man. When setting up objective markers as part of Step 4 of Pariah Nexus tournament mission sequence, or setting up a new objective marker as part of the primary mission, such as the ritual, do I measure from or to the center or edge of the objective marker? In all cases and instances, you measure from the center of the objective marker. This also includes the central objective marker in the search and destroy deployment map when measuring the boundaries of the deployment zones. I guess I missed this down here, this core rule update for pivoting. Models have a pivot value of 0 unless otherwise stated. Models that are not on a round base, excluding aircraft, have a pivot value of 2 inches unless otherwise stated. So before it said monsters and vehicles basically had a pivot point of 2 inches. So now everything has a pivot point of 2 inches unless your base is round. So that definitely makes it bad for small-based things like Thunderwolf Cavalry. Now they're on round bases, I think, but like bikers generally are on oval bases, things like that. They subtract 2 from their move when they want to turn their base now. All right, so next question here. If a unit includes some models that have objective control characteristic of 0 and some models that have an objective control characteristic higher than 0, does that prevent it from starting to perform an action? No. To start performing the sabotage action, does it require both the terrain feature and your unit to not be within your deployment zone? Or is it just your unit that must not be within your deployment zone? Only your unit must not be within your deployment zone to start performing the sabotage action. Okay. In Burden of Trust, can you guard objective markers in your own deployment zone? Yes. If an action states in its unit section that one unit can perform it, is it possible for multiple units to each be performing one instance of that action? No. For primary and secondary missions that award victory points for destroying a character model or units, if those models or units are returned to the battlefield and then subsequently destroyed again, will such primary and secondary missions award victory points? Yes. For the purposes of the mission pack, are there any amendments to the core rules regarding how ruins affect charging units and which models can fight? No. This means that models can be positioned to make it difficult to charge directly through sections of terrain features into combat, as models can't end their charge move where any part of the models or base would be within sections of those terrain features, examples within solid walls. This may mean that the result of the charge roll would be greater to allow a unit to make a charge move that ends within engagement range and not within any sections of the terrain feature. So basically, they're basically saying, we like cheaty bullshit. That's what I'm reading there. Pariah Nexus missions, yeah, we're not really gonna talk too much about that. So the terrain layout. So this is pretty cool. So these are more than 4 inches in height. Anything that's, you know, dark, 2 inches or less is going to be blue. And so now we have some of the same terrain layouts. I think they probably are still the same, but we have measurements now. Thank God. This one is slightly different. These are directly on the backfield. So this is 2 inches or less in height. These are 2 inches or less in height. Everything else is 4 inches or higher. So this is pretty interesting here. Now they've changed these diagrams a little bit to make it a little less ridiculous. This is new, so that's pretty interesting. This little eyeball means something. What did this say? Alternate area terrain sections. So single area terrain or separate area terrain. I see. So these are separate pieces of terrain. These are the same. Got it. Got it, got it, got it. Separate. Separate, separate, separate. Look how crazy this shit is now, man. Jesus Christ. Okay, so this point here, what's this one then? 12 and 18 there, and then 6 inches there. Huge, just death zone middle. Jeez, that's awful looking. This is funky, right? God, you can't see around anything except until you get into the middle there. So these are all pretty interesting. These got box lane here, boxman, boxy boxers. Huge firing lane there. Not really a great firing lane there, but this one is a nice firing lane down here, at least into the middle. And then up here, maybe a little bit down that side. So this is a pretty interesting one as well. This one is different as well. I mean, these are all different. These are crazy. These are against the edge of the table. Like, I think I like it. I think I like it. I like it because people are gonna knock shit off the edge of the table so much easier now. You're gonna brush by the table and it's just gonna be like, whoop. Goodbye piece of terrain. This is weird. Just a bunch of little random 2-inch things in the middle. Your Imperial Knight's gonna just stomp all over that. Kind of strange otherwise. It's kind of open. Like there's a lane here down where you can see. Yeah, I don't know. There's like lanes here. There's not really places to hide, at least in Dawn of War. All right, and then we have stuff about pairings and rankings, and then an afterword. And that's gonna do it, guys. Oh my God, we got through it. It was a little bit longer than the part 1, I think. I'm not exactly sure how long this video is, but I know it's longer. If you stuck it out with me, thanks so much. This was a whole lot of stuff to go over, and the game is now completely fucking different. We got pivoting. We just have some big overall clarifications with how some of the rules work. Heroic interventions, 1 CP. which is much more affordable, and you can get free CP on anything now. You can't advance and do actions anymore, which is big. We have secret missions, gigantic flyers might be interesting, dev wound protection on mortal wounds. There's a whole slew of changes, which basically puts us into like 10.5 edition. This is so much different now, especially because Pariah Nexus comes with a whole change to the missions and stuff as well, and the way that you play them, just the way things are scored. The whole thing is completely different now. So that is gonna do it for us today. There's so much to digest here. There's so much that we're not gonna initially see. These changes are not, what's gonna happen is not gonna be obvious. Just a wild amount of things to process here. The game's just completely different. We gotta go out there and we gotta start playing games, so go do that. If you liked the video, thunderhammer the like button, subscribe to the channel, hit Nurgle's bell icon, leave a comment, and check out our other videos as well. I am exhausted. I am out of here. I will see you in the next one.